So now we're here just around sunset to get that beautiful color in the sky. And then we're gonna wait a little while after we take that exposure, wait for the building lights to come on, and then blend the two so you get this beautiful sunset sky and you get the nighttime effect of the lit buildings. And we're so fortunate because we've got a very clear day. We can see Smith Tower on the left and the Space Needle on the right. So now it's just a waiting game and making sure everything's okay. But now I'm gonna take a couple of shots and see what happens. I'm shooting with the Sony a7R III with the Sony 100 to 400 f4.5 to 5.6 G Master lens on. It's a super sharp lens. I'm at about 350 millimeters of that focal length to get this beautiful compression effect of the foreground trees, the midground skyline, and the distant mountains with the beautiful sky. So hopefully everything works out. The key here is to set your tripod in the composition that you want and then not move it, because you want to just align it perfectly. You don't want multiple exposures to have any misregistration because the building lights want to come on and you want to be able to blend that exactly at the right place. Minimal changes are okay. You can align it later in Photoshop, but the less you have to do in Photoshop later on, the better for stuff like that. Here is the image I just took. You notice the beautiful sky still has a nice orange glow. That's what we really want to capture for this scene. You also get a good idea of the composition. You see the Space Needle at the very right, and at the very left you've got the Smith Tower. Columbia Tower is the biggest building there on the left-hand side. Little foreground trees. I'm going to zoom up now to 100% to show you how sharp it really is. Look at that tree line. Extremely sharp. There's a little bit of haze, so the buildings are a little hazy, but it's still very sharp. I mean, I'm amazed at how good this 100-400 lens is. It's just spectacular. We've even picked up a little bit of glow of the sunset here in the building, and you can see some of the lights have begun to come on, but now we're going to wait for more of the lights to come on to really blend that sunset scene with the nighttime feel. Okay, now the sun has really set, the building lights have come on, and the skyline is really looking nice. The Space Needle's lit up, Columbia Tower's lit up, all the little buildings have also lit up. Now I'm going to take another shot. Now the question always becomes, how do you know when it's night enough? So typically for me, when the exposure time at f8 and ISO 100 is about 4 to 6 seconds, that's about the time I know that I'm getting good shadow detail while still getting some of that highlight information from the lights. So it's at about 4 seconds right now. I'm going to take a picture. And we'll see what that looks like. Just a quick thing, make sure your image stabilization is turned off on the tripod when the exposure lengths are this long, because the image stabilization will actually fight against you and give you blurry images when it's on a tripod for that long. So make sure your image stabilization is off. And now let's see what that 4-second exposure looked like when the building lights come on. Here is the image I just took. Look how beautiful the building lights come on, yet you still have some shadow detail, so you can see a little detail in the mountains, a little detail in the trees. And now I'm going to go to 100% to show you how beautiful that looks. And look at the lights, beautiful. Here are the trees in the foreground. Everything looks super sharp, super great. Here now is the Space Needle lit up. So I think we're pretty much done now. We're going to combine the sunset sky shot from earlier with this nightline shot of the skyline. And then we're going to have a beautiful sky, well-lit buildings, great shadow detail, and just a properly exposed scene for the overall image. Yay! Okay, now you're looking at the two relevant images in Lightroom. The first image is the sunset shot where the sky is a beautiful shade of orange and yellow, but the building lights haven't turned on yet, so that's relatively uninteresting. The second shot you see is the one where the building lights have come on, but the sky is kind of bland, faded yellow. So it would be great if we could combine easily the sky from one shot and the building lights from the other. Just as a little review, here's the EXIF information on the right regarding the sunset shot. It was taken at 1/6 of a second, f8, ISO 100. I shot this at 400 millimeters using the Sony G Master 100 to 400 millimeter lens and the a7R III. The second image was a little longer as far as shutter speed goes, and that was about 5 seconds, again shot at f8, ISO 100, 400 millimeters with the 100, 400 and the a7R III. It's important between shots to keep your aperture and focal length the same, so there's no differences in magnification as you go from one shot to the other. So what I do is I take both these images and I bring them in to Photoshop. So I'm going to select these two. I'm going to say edit in, open as layers in Photoshop. And this will import the images into Photoshop into layers. And remember, at 400 millimeters, even though they're on a tripod, there's going to be some differences in alignment. So the first thing I'm going to make sure is that all the layers, just two in this case, are aligned. So when I do make some changes, there's no misregistration. So just as a review, on the right hand side, I'm going to hide and reveal the two images. So you see the building lights do come on, but there's a slight difference in registration. So I'm going to go ahead and align those two layers first. So I'm going to select this one and command select and go under under edit, auto align layers. And typically I just use the auto projection. That seems to do a fine job. I'm going to select that. And if you notice, there's actually a little bit of difference, because as you see a little bit of white edge at the very edges, and we know that there has been a slight shift in pixels. So again, this is, if I hide the top layer, you see there's quite a bit of white on the bottom layer. So there was a little bit of movement here. So putting this back on, keep your eye, for example, on the Space Needle. I'm going to zoom up to 100% here in this area, and I'm going to turn the layers on and off. And you see the only difference we see is the fact that the lights have come on from one image to the other. Okay, pretty cool. So everything is nice and aligned at this point. I'm going to go back down to 100%. I'm going to make sure these two images are selected, and all I have to do at this point is go under the top layer, make sure the top layer is selected, and under the normal blending mode, come back down to lighten. Right? So you notice at this point the building lights have quote-unquote come on, but the sunset sky is still not looking great. The building lights have come on, yet you do still have some detail in the shadow areas. So you still see a little bit of detail in the trees, a little bit of detail in the buildings that have not quite come on yet, but the sky is still sort of the bland appearance. So how can we replace that sky? An easy way of doing it is just flipping the order of your building lights versus your sunset image. Okay, so let me show you what I mean. I'm going to go ahead and undo what I just did. Go back to the auto align layer. I'm going to take the bottom layer and go on top. Okay, like that. And I'm going to use the lighten blending mode again. Right, really not a difference, right? You see, like, well, it looks like it's the same image as we had before. But now let's add a layer mask here. When we have the layer mask, I'm going to hide the bland sky and reveal the interesting sky. And I'm going to go this and make sure your black and white are selected, and hit the G key, which is for gradient, and make sure under here you've got the foreground or foreground or transparent selected. Make sure it's not the foreground or background, which is the default. If you do that, it doesn't work quite as well. Make sure you have the foreground to transparent selected. That's key. And then also make sure the type of gradient is a linear gradient, which is the first one selected. And the mode is normal, opacity is 100. And I'm just going to go and hold the shift key down and just draw a straight line from here to here. And there. Now what we've done is we've masked out the uninteresting sky from the top layer and shown the interesting sky from the bottom layer. As a final result, which is very, very simple, it's a lot easier to actually do than to explain, but you've got this beautiful sunset sky along with this gorgeous nighttime appearance to your skyline, yet still maintaining some detail in the shadows of the trees and some of the buildings, the water. You can go on later and edit this to your heart's content to make it a little darker if you want, make it more contrasty, but at least now you have a base layer of information to work with that's relatively noise-free and just beautifully rendered. So this is the sort of the final product. Let me show you with the top layer turned off. This is basically just the sunset sky. And now with the combination of sunset sky and building lights. Again, before, after. I think it looks really good. I'm gonna flatten the images, layer, flatten. And because we have a little bit of edge at the corners, I'm going to go ahead and crop it just a little bit. I'm going to first make it a little smaller and then just crop it. And I'm going to see the original ratio. I'm just going to bring it in just a little bit from the edges so we don't see the white so much. And there, that's pretty good. So I'm going to save this, and this gets exported back into Lightroom. Go to Lightroom, and here it is. Here's the final image. So just as a review, here is the sunset sky, here's the building lights, and here's a combination of the building lights and sunset sky. At this point, I would go ahead and edit this a little bit more, and just for sake of practice, let's see how I would start this. I am going to hide this so I can see a little bit more of the information here, and let's just see what auto does. Auto, I'm not too happy with it. It creates a little bit of a halo effect over here. I'm going to undo that. I'm going to increase the clarity just a little bit. I'm going to dehaze it, which I like already, maybe about 20 or so. And I'm going to warm up the image just a little bit, particularly at the bottom. So I'm going to do that as a gradient. I'm going to go over here, choose the gradient tool, make sure everything is zeroed out, increase the temperature just a tad, and just do a gradient from the bottom. So it's a little bit too yellow at this point, so I'm going to fade back on that gradient, on that maybe about a 6. So that looks pretty good. While I'm at it, I'm going to dehaze just that portion a little bit more, maybe increase the contrast, because the bottom part is what I really want to concentrate on. It's the top part actually looks pretty good to me as is. And maybe decrease my blacks just a little bit. See how that grabs me. Yeah, that's actually looking pretty good. So here is the final image. Basically, I'm done. Just a few easy steps. Looking back at the history, this is the edited image in Photoshop, and this is the final image after some minor tweaks. And that's it. Well, thank you very much for your attention, and I hope you found this tutorial helpful. Let me know if you want to see more of these later on. Thanks a lot.